Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 310. Today we are in for such a treat. We have back on the show with us Scott Forsgren, who is BetterHealthGuy.com. He was on the show about 2 months ago, episode 298. That can't be right. It must be just about a month ago, episode 298. It feels like time is just flying. That is so amazing. We are now into the early 300s, episode 310, and I just cannot believe how the time is flying. Scott, when we had you on the show, you really opened my eyes to the amazing ability that the body has in healing itself. Your story is so inspiring. You suffered from these symptoms for years that had you bedridden, that had you feeling like you're a prisoner of your own body, had you so sick. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, was it 46 doctors you had to go to before you even discovered the actual diagnosis?
Yeah, I think I had said 45, but that's just about right. And finally, that was 8 years later when I finally got sent to someone who did some energetic testing and suggested that I go back and have my medical doctor do some testing in the realm of Lyme. And fortunately, as crazy as it seemed at the time, that lady was amazingly on it. And we ended up validating everything she had come up with. So yeah, about 45 different doctors over 8 years.
Amazing. Now, I encourage listeners to go back and check out episode 298, where they can hear your full story. Today's a continuation of that interview because I realized, oh my gosh, Scott is such a wealth of information. I can't possibly get everything I want to get out of him in one episode. So we kind of started the conversation there. And even though today independently will be an amazing interview to listen to, you can listen to them out of order. You can go back, you can stop this episode and go back and listen to 298 and then continue with this episode. Or you could just, kick back, listen to this episode and then go listen to 298. Because I believe that regardless of which way we approach this, because it's holistic, we want to listen to all the different facets, all the different angles we take when it comes to figuring out complicated symptoms and complicated health issues. There's sort of a foundation of health that Scott Forsgren helps people to go through when they're faced with multiple symptoms, especially if they have an inkling that they have Lyme disease. I'm so happy to have you back on the show, and especially, thank you for taking the time. I know that your area has been hit with the tragedy of the forest fires and the smoke. And so the fact that you even have a voice right now is miraculous.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. It was an honor to be on the first time and an honor to be asked back. And, fortunately, I'm a couple hours away from where most of those fires are happening. And it's just such a sad and tragic experience. But yeah, the air quality, even that far away, it's pretty amazing how difficult many people outside in the area are wearing masks at this point, which I think is a wise thing to do, but certainly doesn't compare in any way to the people that have been more directly impacted by it. And it is such a tragedy.
You told me that you have air filters. You have like 5 air filters in your house. Can you tell me what your favorite brand is?
Yeah, I have 3 IntelliPures, which is probably the one that I recommend the most for people. And then I have Austin Air, Air Oasis. I have a whole house air filtration as well. So a lot of these are, me over the years trying different ones to see which ones I really kind of liked and landed upon. And right now the IntelliPure is the one that I have 3 of and really do like quite a lot.
I have the Austin bedroom unit. I've seen it on Amazon for as much as $800, and last night I just saw it was $600 on Amazon. I was like, wow. Man. Yeah, but that one, I really love it. I have it in our bedroom. Our son has his bed in our room. We have a big enough bedroom that all of us sleep in the same room. It just, it just works out because if he were to have his own bedroom, he'd be on the other side of the house, and he's too young for that, to not be able to hear him what he's doing, right? Because he still is 3 years old. So we all sleep in the same room, and so just turning that on before we go to bed It creates nice white noise, but it really does change the air. Like I walk into the bedroom after it's been on for a few hours, and it's like I just walked up to a waterfall and I'm breathing in fresh air, fresh spring air from a waterfall, from a forest. Like it really just shifts the quality of the air. And so I can only imagine what the inside of your house is like right now with 5 air filters running. Must be like walking through the woods on a spring day.
It is one of those when you come back from being gone for a few hours, it's kind of that same experience of like, wow, the air feels like you're at the beach or somewhere near a waterfall, like you said, and so it's quite nice. And I think I have a 3-level townhome, and so they're kind of on each level. But I think having had the experience that I had in the past with mold illness being such a big part of my journey through
Mm.
Lyme disease and that whole condition, I think it's just a wise thing to minimize as much of these exposures as possible. I live fairly close to an airport, and so just trying to reduce toxicity and not stress the body when we don't need to.
Absolutely. Now you have this like wonderful list of bullet points that you check off when you want to teach someone who thinks they might have Lyme disease or at least has a very complicated set of symptoms that they should go through in order to support their body's ability to heal itself. And last time we covered rewiring the limbic system, which was really interesting, the emotional healing and why that's so important. And then we talked about mold, testing for mold, and the impact that mold has on our health. To continue our list, you have these great bullet points. We want to work our way down one at a time. Um, Off the top of your head, was there one that you wanted to start our interview off with?
Sure. I think last time we left off with starting the focus on improving gut health and how that impacts our overall body.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I know that's actually one of the biggest concerns our listeners have. I have an ongoing poll in our Facebook group, the Learn Trail Facebook group, and that's the number one thing that listeners are concerned about is how to heal the gut. So I think everyone would benefit from hearing this. So tell us how do we improve our gut and optimize our gut health?
Okay, sure. So I think it's important to step back and consider that the majority of the immune system, the majority of our neurotransmitters do originate in the gut. So the more we can optimize our GI health, really the more systemic and far reaching influence we have, and the more we can improve our overall health. So I think the first thing is to look at diet, and that does need to be very individualized, but removing the foods that are known to be more common stressors, for example, things like gluten, cow dairy, looking at or working with a nutritionist to figure out which diet might make the most sense for someone to explore. So all kinds of good tools out there. People are familiar with paleo and AIP. The ketogenic diet is very popular. The GAPS and SCD diet popular in a lot of the children on the spectrum and even in the adult population as well. The low FODMAP diet. But one of them that really I have been observing over the past couple of years that I think is quite helpful for many people dealing with Lyme disease and mold illness is the low histamine diet. And we'll talk a little bit more about mast cell activation syndrome and histamine intolerance, but it is not an easy diet to do. It's easier if people generally prepare their food in the home rather than eating outside, and we can go into details about why that is. But it is one of the diets that I've seen really help to reduce inflammation in people and to actually help with a lot of their symptoms just by changing the diet. And I think the more we can focus on reducing inflammation in general, while we're then working on treating the underlying causes or triggers of our health condition, the easier it is to get through that process, the less inflamed people are, and the better they feel while they are being treated. So I think the low histamine diet is certainly one to explore, and definitely one that while it can be difficult, it is one that people oftentimes will say, yes, it's difficult, but I wouldn't trade that diet for the symptoms that went away as a result of doing it, and they generally like to continue. And it's not something they have to do for life, but it is something that can be very helpful until they've kind of identified and gotten some of the underlying triggers addressed that are causing some of their symptoms. So removing the foods that are stressful to the body, again, gluten, cow dairy, sugar, food sensitivity testing, I think is worth exploring. If people have very specific and unique foods that might be an issue for them, avoiding those foods can be important. But generally speaking, I think gluten is fairly non-negotiable, and people with Lyme and mold-related issues, I think that one really needs to go. Cow dairy, probably at least half or more of the people would do better by eliminating cow dairy. So just avoiding those things that are stressful to the system, creating more inflammation, and then incorporating foods that are as nutritionally dense as possible. So not the prepared processed foods, but really getting real foods into the diet. So as much organic food as possible, eliminating the GMO foods and restricting the processed foods is important. And then depending on whether or not people consume meat, the organic grass-fed meats or pasture-raised poultry or wild-caught seafood, those can be very helpful as well. Healthy fats are really important. So butter or ghee, chia seeds, coconut oil, olive oil, those types of things can be fantastic. A lot of the plant and seed-based oils I really like. And one of the things that I personally try to do every day, and I think it's actually been a really critical part of my own recovery, is the idea of a power shake. And so every morning I have some high quality protein, rice and pea protein. I add some collagen powder, a blend of different fibers that helps not only with the gut, but also from a perspective of binding toxicity. Phospholipids like phosphatidylcholine for supporting cell membranes, some healthy fats like flaxseed oil, sunflower seed oil, a tablespoon of chia seeds, and then an organic almond milk or some type of nut milk. And for me, that just really helps in terms of muscles, in terms of structural integrity. It's been very, very useful in my overall health maintenance. And then some of the products that I think are worth exploring really are two of them that kind of stand out for me. One being Megaspore Biotic, which is a spore-based probiotic from Kiran Krishnan and Microbiome Labs. I think that's a fantastic probiotic. People seem to tolerate it fairly well. It is one of the probiotics that people that have mast cell and histamine issues generally seem to tolerate, where many other probiotics are actually a problem or an additional stressor if you have a histamine issue. So Megaspore Biotic is one that I feel is very, very helpful for people, can help in terms of the intestinal hyperpermeability, or what we call leaky gut, which is oftentimes a reason why we are so reactive to foods and why we have some of the inflammation that we have, is the immune system constantly being triggered by these food and other particles that are getting through the gut membrane. So Megaspore Biotic, very helpful. And then I also like Dr. Zach Bush's work with Restore for, it was Restore for Gut Health. I think they might have changed the name. It's still Restore, but I think they're starting to identify that it has effects more systemically beyond even just the gut. And that is also another tool that I think people oftentimes find helpful from a perspective of leaky gut, intestinal hyperpermeability as well. And then it can, depending on each person's individual situation, looking at gut health often will go beyond the diet piece and the intestinal hyperpermeability piece, but also into some of those microbial overgrowths, the dysbioses, the SIBO and SIFO, the parasites, and those types of things, which we can talk about more as well. But that's where I would generally start from a diet perspective, from a gut perspective, is eliminating those stressful foods, getting really highly nutritionally dense foods into your daily routine, and then looking at something like Megaspore Biotic or Restore. And then probably for many people listening to this, if they're dealing with Lyme or mold issues, considering a trial of a low histamine diet.
I love it. And we can actually Google low histamine foods and high histamine foods. So there's a whole list of foods that actually help the body handle histamine. So like foods that would be really good for someone who's in a high histamine state to eat these foods. And then there's a whole list of foods like pineapple's one of them, and my husband was so bummed out because he loves pineapple. But there's like a list of foods that, are healthy foods for people without histamine issues. But these foods will cause a high histamine level if you're already sort of overburdened. And so we just avoid those foods. And when you bring down histamine, it is like, it feels like a miracle occurred, because, when we're in that high histamine state, our whole body's inflamed. It's systemic. The body's just really hot and angry and upset and hyperactive. And we're probably having diarrhea, and we're probably feeling very irritable. And sometimes it comes out as skin rashes or patches of almost looking like eczema. And
Yes.
the anxiety comes with it because the physiology is just inflamed and upset. And when we remove the stressors and bring down that inflammation, oh my gosh, it's like we can breathe again and we can start thinking again. There's also a lot of brain fog that comes with that high histamine level. So I definitely agree with you that um, that correcting the diet can really help to bring us to a state of feeling a little human again.
Absolutely. And I think, this is something Dr. Klinghardt's talked about for years, not so much the mast cell and histamine side of it, but the fact that the majority of our symptoms are the result of the inflammatory event that occurs. Let's look at the microbes, for example. It's not so much that the symptoms are from the bugs, but it's from the immune system's reaction to those bugs that creates inflammation. So this idea of, how do we create tolerance? How do we create integration within our microbiome? And so this is kind of a similar idea in that a lot of the symptoms people experience are the result of this mast cell activation, this histamine intolerance. And maybe we just kind of jump into the whole idea of mast cell activation and talk a little about that. So people have probably heard of mast cell activation syndrome, the overproduction of histamine. There's a number of other mediators as well besides just the histamine, but the histamine is the one that people tend to talk about probably the most. This is something that has been known in the autism arena for many years. I've been aware of it for some time, but in the Lyme disease, mold illness arena, the whole mast cell activation piece is something that I would say has really just gotten more attention in probably the past 2 to 3 years. And I think it is gaining awareness. I know Dr. Neil Nathan recently mentioned that probably half or more of the patients he works with have a mast cell issue. I spoke with a doctor at the recent ILADS conference in Chicago a couple of weeks ago that said, well, it probably is more in her patient population, probably more like 90%. And so I actually see this as another spectrum, so to speak, that not everyone will be as significantly impacted by mast cell activation and histamine issues, but that most people that are dealing with chronic infections and chronic toxicity, Lyme disease, mold, and so on, probably do have some degree of mast cell activation and histamine related issues. And so some of the symptoms, and you beautifully mentioned some of them already, but it can be things like rashes or hives. It can be flushing sensations, kind of like when you take niacin, that same type of skin sensation. It can be itching. It can be nausea or diarrhea or other gut-related symptoms. Some people, it will affect their blood pressure. It can cause shortness of breath or heart palpitations. The cognitive issues, so headaches and brain fog, anxiety, certainly fatigue. Some people will lose weight. They'll feel weak, they'll feel dizzy, and can even lead to long-term things like osteoporosis and things of that nature. So one of the primary triggers for mast cell activation is mold. And I do think that that is probably the top thing people should look at if they're suspecting mast cell or histamine related issues, is what is their exposure to mold in their environment. But, and where it becomes a little more challenging in this realm, is there are so many other triggers. Parasites can be a trigger, Lyme disease, co-infections of Lyme disease like Bartonella particularly, environmental toxins like heavy metals, some medications, foods obviously can be a trigger for mast cell and histamine issues, some supplements. Even something like a temperature change, going from indoors to outdoors where it's colder, or the reverse,
Mm.
that can sometimes trigger a mast cell reaction. Physical or emotional stress can trigger these mast cell reactions. And then electromagnetic fields is becoming more and more of a topic of exploration in this realm as well. So, how many of us in our modern world are not getting exposed to some EMFs that might also be a contributor? So, I think that we will continue to identify more of these triggers, and also more and more that EMFs are playing a role in triggering mast cells. So we need to consider that the mast cells themselves and the histamine overproduction, those are things that I think we want to look at early in treatment. If you're being treated for Lyme or for mold illness, and this is a potential factor, then you want to look at it early on to reduce inflammation. People, like I said, will feel a lot of their symptoms improve, but it also can help you to tolerate other treatments much more easily. So it kind of opens the toolbox to some other things that you may not be able to tolerate if you're not also supporting this mast cell and histamine side of things. So it does lead to some significant shifts in terms of how people feel. And then we still need to work on these triggers. So I know there's different thoughts about mast cell activation. I don't at this point personally view it as the core issue. I think there are other core issues or triggers that we need to look at and address. But I do think that it's an important part of getting the person to where they can tolerate treatment, where they feel better while they're being treated. So the low histamine diet again plays a role. It's not easy, but people do often experience enough improvement that they are willing to stick with it. And if someone tries it for a month and they don't notice any significant shift, then maybe it's not something that's necessary for them to do. But a lot of people do notice a big change with that. You mentioned a lot of the low histamine food lists that are online, and you'll find different ones on different lists. But for the most part, there is a lot of overlap, and incorporating a low histamine diet, I think, is important. The interesting thing is a lot of the things that people historically have thought were potentially helpful from a health perspective are things that are potentially not good ideas when you're dealing with this issue. So fermented foods, for example, I mean, how many people for years have said, oh, fermented foods are the way back to health, and we really got to incorporate them? Or bone broth. Even a lot of the probiotics are histamine promoting. Fortunately, there are some now that are available that are either histamine reducing or degrading, or can be tolerated fairly well by most people with mast cell issues. But if you're just taking probiotics and not giving thought to, oh, is this making my mast cell and histamine issue worse, that's probably something to explore. So from a treatment option perspective, there are some practitioners that might use pharmaceutical medications like ketotifen, chromalin, a lot of the different allergy, Claritin, Allegra, Xyzal, things like that. Certainly, some practitioners find very helpful. DAO, which is diamine oxidase, is available as a supplement. That can be helpful for some people, especially around the time that they eat, if their mast cell issues are triggered by foods. Dr. Theo Heritis has a fantastic product that I've been aware of and used for many years called NeuroProtect. It's from a company called Algonaut. Lots of people in the autism arena that are familiar with that product, NeuroProtect. Dr. Ben Lynch has a probiotic combination that he created specifically to help support people dealing with histamine issues, and it's called Probiota Histamine X, or some people say Histamine X. It's from a company called Seeking Health, and that one has been very helpful for people. It's probably only been available for about the last maybe 9 to 12 months. Things like quercetin, vitamin C, those can be very helpful as well. And then we're seeing more and more combination type products that companies are starting to release that I'm excited to see, over time, how much those tools are helpful for people. Quicksilver Scientific, which is Dr. Chris Shade, has a product just about maybe 3 to 6 months ago that came out called Hista Aid, which I'm very excited about. And then I know Beyond Balance has one called Mast Ease that is also relatively new. So it's nice to see that there is awareness growing in this realm, and that companies are starting to create, formulate, and develop other solutions that potentially will be helpful for people.
I had Dr. Ben Lynch on the show, and
Mhm.
that's a great episode to listen to if people are interested in learning about epigenetics and how to actually shift the body's health in the face of genes, in the face of genetic SNPs or expressions. And he talked about that there's a certain sort of like everyone kind of knows now about MTHFR, the ability that we have on a genetic level to methylate our B vitamins or not methylate our B vitamins, or how our body handles them. And some people are great at doing it. Some people like really need some support, and would benefit from some supplements because of how their body's genetic expression is happening. And he dives into explaining that there's so many more than just that one, and there's one out there that some people have it, that the would determine whether how good you are, how good your body is at metabolizing histamine. And some people are just really poor histamine metabolizers. So because the body's supposed to be able to break it down and get rid of it, and because we need histamine, right? Our body
Right.
needs it. It's part of our good function. But just like any an overuse of something can throw things out of balance. Too much water, too little water, right? We want that Goldilocks amount, Goldilocks amount of histamine. And so some people need that. The diet will help, the low histamine diet, and then taking on some of those supplements that you had mentioned that are, we don't need to go for the Claritin or the over-the-counter prescription synthetic drugs, because there are these wonderful, natural, and very effective supplements that will help the body, support the body in breaking down the histamine. Now, those who have Lyme would really benefit from this, but any person who has allergies also would benefit. So seasonal allergies, cat allergies, allergies to wool, like whatever. If our body is expressing an allergy, it means we're having a histamine response. And so just to come back into balance, and look, well, why is it that some people have crazy hay fever and other people, their immune system doesn't react to pollen? It's not that it's because you were born that way, like how we've been told. It's that there's something going on. And I've actually worked with clients who they got off of gluten, just like you said. They adjusted their diet, their gut, they healed their leaky gut, and their lifelong struggle with seasonal allergies completely disappeared. Because when we heal the source, when we heal the root cause, now the immune system can relax and can start expressing itself naturally and healthfully. So there's a lot to say for the diet you recommended, because that diet is not only so good for lowering histamine, but so good for healing the gut.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a huge fan. I've done an interview as well with Dr. Lynch on his book Dirty Genes. Had an opportunity to meet him in September in Dallas, which was great. And one of the things I really like about his message is not so much, oh, you have MTHFR, oh, you have KIT genes or HNMT genes or what CBS, whatever that gene is. I like that he doesn't focus so much on, okay, you have this issue, so you need to take this supplement, but that he's really stepping back and looking at it more from the perspective, even the title of the book, Dirty Genes. What are those things that are contributing to our genes expressing in a way that's not supportive of our optimal health? And what can we do to clean up our genes? He's been talking a lot in the last couple of weeks on his Facebook Lives and things about sauna therapy as one tool for cleaning up our genes. Lots of different tools out there, but I like his message in that I think we can get too caught up in the gene side of things, in that potential that we have for something to express because of a gene variant or single nucleotide polymorphism or SNP. But the idea that is something that determines our outcome is not something that I resonate with. And I think, unfortunately, we don't really have, for the most part, ways to identify which genes are actually expressing in terms of the function. We just know what the potential is.
Right.
So, MTHFR, yes, very commonly discussed. HLA-DR in the realm of mold illness, very commonly discussed. But I think I think we don't want to get too caught up in those. And what I unfortunately see a lot of times happen is people do find that they have an impairment and they lose hope that they can actually get well and feel as though their body is failing them in some way and not supporting them in their recovery. And so I just think it's critical when we get into the gene conversation to look at the epigenetics. What are the influencers of our genes rather than the potential for something to go wrong? And I know you resonate with that as well.
Oh, it's you beautifully said though. Beautifully said. Don't get hung up on the potential and think that you're a lost cause. That's that'll lead to disaster. We want to instead go, okay, this is a potential setback. What am I going to do in the face of it? Well, I'm going to eat extra healthy and I'm going to go the extra mile around making sure my body's clean and healthy and detoxing healthfully. And like you said, getting into that sauna is so beneficial because it's just taking the toxic burden off of people who, if they are up against some genetic potentials, they're really going the extra mile to help their body, support their body in the face of that, and they're going to be so much better as a result.
Yeah, I totally agree. With the one caveat being when we get to sauna therapy, I do encourage people to talk with their practitioner, make sure the timing is right, make sure they're sweating, that they've got the right support, getting electrolytes, that they're detoxifying well before doing that, because people
Mhm.
think of the toxins that are coming out in the sweat, but what we don't often think about is the toxins that are getting mobilized inside the body, that after the sauna session is over, the body says, okay, what do I now do with all this stuff that's running around inside me? So you've got to make sure that your liver, kidneys, lymphatic system, extracellular matrix is all optimized, that you've got binders on board, drainage remedies. I think we touched on some of that stuff last time. So people, saunas are great, but people do want to talk with their practitioners and make sure that it's the right time for them.
Do you have an episode or an article that you've done about this?
I did. I had a conversation. I think it was actually episode number one, if I remember right, way back when, which was about a year and a half ago, where we did get into some of the sauna conversation, and probably maybe it's something I'll do a blog or put some more information out there about as well.
Very cool. Well, then I urge listeners to go check out your podcast at betterhealthguide.com and check out episode 1. I totally agree with you. We don't want to just jump in willy-nilly, although I encourage everyone to have that level of enthusiasm, but to have a plan. To have a plan, like you said, talk to your practitioner. Hopefully everyone can find a holistic health practitioner, a naturopath, or a health coach to work with to guide them through and just make sure that their plan is, especially for Lyme patients, uh, they want to really have the slow and steady wins the race mentality, right?
Yeah, and in this particular topic of sauna, just in the last couple weeks, Dr. Lynch has actually done some Facebook Live, so people can find him, find those videos, and then associated with those videos, his team, along with his knowledge, obviously, they put together a 3-page document that goes into all of the things you should do leading up to a sauna, doing a sauna, after you do a sauna, considering electrolytes and all of those types of things. So I think that's a great resource that people can access now through Dr. Lynch's website if they're interested.
Wonderful. Excellent. And I love my Sunlighten. The Sunlighten sauna is wonderful. I got it back in February and it's really helped me. Well, because it's been part of the cornerstone of my detox sort of routine, I do a lot more things other than just sauna, like you said, all the things leading up to going into the sauna and then after the sauna, but that we create the steps and the routine. But it's so relaxing, and I kind of feel like a new person since I use it but at least 6 times a week, 6 to 7 times a week. So does my husband, and now our son has started to really like it as well. And so we have like family time in the sauna.
Yeah, and it's funny because we both came at this from two different angles, and Sunlighten is the one that I use and have in the garage as well. So I think it's a great product. Mine is now 10 years old this year and
Wow.
still works just as well as it did the first day that it was delivered. So I love their
Yay.
products. Yeah.
That's so cool. Awesome. Awesome. I know that Ben Lynch like Sunlighten as well. And I believe Dr. Klinghardt told me that Sunlighten was the one that he recommended. So I knew I was in good company when I purchased mine. Let's see, we've got this list of stuff. We want to keep going down the list. Anything else you'd like to cover around mast cell activation syndrome or histamine?
No, I think we covered that one pretty well. There is a lot of detail on this topic in Dr. Neil Nathan's new book, Toxic, that just came out last month. So if people are interested in that, I would suggest they take a look at that. I'm sure you've done interviews on that topic as well. I've interviewed Dr. Jill Carnahan and Dr. Theo Theoharidis, and those interviews are available for people that want to really dig into this topic a lot more.
Excellent. Terrific. All right. So, what's the next foundation of health that we should consider?
It's the EMRs and EMFs. So, it's kind of funny. This topic, the whole electromagnetic field or electromagnetic radiation exposure, is something that I remember hearing Dr. Klinghardt talk about when I first met him, January of 2006. And I just remember most people back then laughing and ridiculing him for talking about this topic. There was no one else really talking about it. And of course, oh, he's just, making these things up. It's not a real issue. But I think more and more people are coming to a place where they realize that the EMFs do play a role and do impact us. And even like we talked about, if EMFs are also another potential factor in mast cell related issues, it's certainly something to explore. So I fortunately early on placed a lot of value on the recommendations that Dr. Klinghardt had. And so I've slept in a Faraday cage using the silver lined cloth since 2006. And I think that was a very big piece of my own recovery. If something were to happen to it, I would absolutely get another one. They're not inexpensive, but it is a good investment. So EMFs are certainly stressors to our cells. Dr. Klinghardt talks about how they also make molds and other organisms that are within us more aggressive or produce more biotoxins. I think he would also suggest that if you have mold from water damage in your home environment, that the exponential increase in EMFs is probably another reason why those molds now produce more mycotoxins that also influence our health. So the other piece that's really coming into the discussion more in the past year or so from Dr. Klinghardt and the whole EMF piece is this idea that we have endogenous retroviruses that we are conceived with. They're not necessarily viruses that we acquire, though they can be. And that historically, those endogenous, meaning within us, retroviruses, have not caused us problems from a health perspective. They may even have some beneficial things that they do for us. But the electromagnetic fields now being one of the stressors that may be leading to them expressing in a way that is no longer supportive of our health. And so reducing the EMF exposure certainly plays a role in some of those viruses that might be stressing our system as well. So I think we know it's not possible to completely eliminate EMFs. We do live in a world where there's going to be electromagnetic fields. So the focus has to be on how do we reduce our exposure. If we look at the time of day when reducing exposure is most important, that would be while we're sleeping, because that's when the body's regenerating, restoring, repairing. What we can do during the day to minimize exposure is certainly worth considering. I have my Wi-Fi router, for example, on a timer that turns off when I'm sitting at my desk and maybe comes on for a couple hours in the evening when some other devices might need to use those things. Not sitting all day next to, wireless printers and Bluetooth devices and things like that. So my own EMF mitigation was eliminating cordless phones. I have one phone in my home. It's a wired phone, limiting cell phone use. You will never see me holding a cell phone to my head, using the speaker phone on the cell phone or texting, having a case of some kind on your phone just to minimize when you do need to be within a couple feet of it, or if you do need to, I try not to put it in my pocket or carry it, close to my body. It's usually on the desk or in the car or somewhere else. But having a protective case on your cell phone can be helpful. turning off the Wi-Fi when you don't need to use it, I think, is important. Using hardwired devices as much as possible. And then kind of an extension on the EMF conversation, which I think most of us think of as cell phones and cordless phones and Wi-Fi and so on. Kind of an extension of that is the whole dirty electricity topic, where you can, through the lines that are wiring the electrical outlets in your home or office, you can have dirty electricity that's running on those that can also create some health stress. And so you can implement things. There's fairly easy ways to get meters that you can measure how much dirty electricity is coming across a particular line. And then you can put things in place like Stetzer filters or green wave filters to reduce that dirty electricity exposure. And then coming to the topic of the sleep environment, since that really is when we need to repair and restore, what can we do in our bedrooms? And so using something like the silver lined cloth for me has been a really good solution. Some people like to go further and use the Y Shield or the graphite paint solutions and things like that. It's not always realistic. It's difficult to remove them. And some people still occasionally need to use certain devices in a certain room, which you really can't do once you have that in place. So I love the flexibility of the Faraday cages or the sleep sanctuaries or sleep canopies, having nothing that's plugged in the bedroom. So I don't have any alarm clocks, lamps. The alarm clock is battery operated, nothing that's plugged in, particularly near where you're sleeping in the bedroom. For many years, Dr. Klinghardt recommended turning off the circuit breakers to the house. Some people can get away with doing it to the bedroom, but sometimes you do need to go a little bit further with that. Fortunately, there are companies now that are making switches that can be wired directly into your circuit breaker box, so that you just, on your nightstand, you have a little remote control and you press the button and all of the ones that have been set up to go off will automatically turn off. So for many years, I would turn them off every night as well. And I think, having a building biologist or a bowel biologist come in, if there's someone near you, to do some testing. There's lots of meters out there, but to really do adequate testing, you need 4 or 5 different types of meters to measure all of the different types of stress, the low, the high, the magnetic, the dirty electricity. So there's a number of different meters that are needed. And so I do have a meter. I did what I could. I then hired a building biologist to come out and evaluate my home. And fortunately, things were actually pretty good, but they did identify a couple of other recommendations that would help to reduce exposure. So if people can't access someone like that, get a meter, do it yourself. Dr. Joe Mercola is talking a lot about this now, has some good interviews on the topic that people can go explore and listen to. There is also some thought, and I think this is very true, that EMF sensitivity is correlated to the level of heavy metals in the body and to metal toxicity. And so focusing on detoxification, again, it all comes back to detoxification and to the terrain within the body, removing those heavy metals, that can also help over time to reduce symptoms of electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Dr. Klinghardt has also talked about a couple of things that can be taken internally to help the body, not from a perspective of reducing the exposure, but from a perspective of mitigating the harmful effects. So propolis and rosemary tinctures are 2 different things that can be taken to help support the body against the effects of the EMFs, but that does not replace the need to minimize the actual exposure. And then we talked in our last conversation about the limbic system retraining work, particularly with Annie Hopper's DNRS, or Dynamic Neural Retraining System. That is another tool that many people that have had issues around EMF sensitivities have found that they've really been able to help their situation doing that limbic system work. So I would recommend people explore that as well.
If you can think back to the last time there was a power outage at night, so if all the listeners think back to the last time there was a power outage in their area and it was nighttime, how well did you sleep? I mean, it is amazing. And if you weren't really thinking about it or focusing on it, next time you have a power outage, so maybe there's an ice storm or a windstorm and the power goes out overnight, and you basically get several hours of sleep without any electricity anywhere near your house. So there's no Wi-Fi. In some cases, there's very limited cell tower, availability. There's no there's definitely no electricity. There's no electromagnetic radiation or field. Just notice how rested you feel and how amazing you feel the next day. I can't tell you. And when I lie in bed when there's a power outage, although I can hear the noise of generators off in the distance. Like our entire neighborhood, everyone owns a generator, and so the generators come on. But they're not like directly beside our house; they're just down the street. And I just lie there and I feel it. My body just goes.
It's kind of funny because my body was doing that just listening to you going, imagine the power goes out and there's no EMFs. And I was suddenly like, oh, this is feeling really good.
Right? Right?
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. Every time the power goes out in my area, usually happens at night because the wind picks up in the evening, right? And there's these big windstorms here in the Pacific Northwest. And so we've had power go out for 3 or 4 days at a time. And we just roll with the punches, but the rest that we get, oh, because of course there's nothing to do, the computer's not going to come on, so we just relax, and our body just really loves it. I can really feel the difference. And we've ever since I interviewed Dr. Klinghardt, I've gotten into the habit of turning off our Wi-Fi. We have a Wi-Fi router that has an on-off switch, which makes it really easy. So we only turn the Wi-Fi on, like you said, when we absolutely need it. Other than that, it's off, and our computers are just hardwired to the internet. But I can feel it now. Like when my husband goes to turn it off at night, I feel something and I go, did you just turn it off? Because he comes into the bedroom and I'm like, I felt it. I can really feel it when it's turned on. I can feel it too. Like my whole body almost feels like it's agitated or buzzing a little bit. And we noticed a shift in our son's behavior. We're very sensitive to our son's behavior. We're always looking for food allergies or sensitivities. And every time we do a change in his life, we look to see how it positively or negatively impacted him. And we noticed when we significantly reduced his exposure to Wi-Fi that he became a calmer child. So I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah, and another thing that's worth commenting on is I've heard people, including Dr. Klinghardt, say that you cannot detoxify when you're constantly exposed to EMFs. And so one of the things that people don't think about is the more we minimize our exposure to these electromagnetic fields, the more we're able to detoxify, so much so that you actually have to be a little bit careful about how quickly you reduce your exposure. So I've actually had people that I've worked with that got the canopies, put them in, and I would say, you might want to just the first night try it for an hour, but don't do it all night. And they were excited about it. One in particular that I'm thinking of that maybe did it for several nights in a row, the full night, and had a huge crash because they started detoxifying. And it took them several weeks to get out of that. Ultimately, they landed at higher ground, which is great. But if you expose yourself to EMFs and that's impacting your ability to detoxify, as you start reducing those exposures, you do have the potential of increasing your detoxification and the things the body starts letting go of. And if done too quickly, that can be an uncomfortable situation initially.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. That's just so, so cool. My first real education around that, very early on in my podcast, I had Sal LaDuca on the show.
Yeah.
And he talked about how insomnia was cured by telling people to unplug things near their bed, because he's like, duh. And he comes from it's all science. It's not woo woo, because we always think, oh, EMF, that sounds so woo woo. It's all science. He was an electrician, but like a really high level electrician. And he was just explaining that if you have anything plugged in near your entire bed is just like this amplifier for electricity, for electromagnetic fields, because of all the coils in your bed. And you're on probably most beds are on a metal frame, and then you plug in your lamp beside your bed, and even though the lamp's not on, there's still electricity going on, which is amplified by your entire bed. So he was curing insomnia left, right, and center by just telling people to unplug things in their bedroom. So your advice is right on par, and it's just amazing how we can make these simple changes and really see a profound difference.
And to your point, you really don't want metal in your bed or box spring or frame at all. So it's better to look for a mattress setup that does not have any metal, because you don't want that metal to be yet another antenna for all of this electrical and EMF stress that you're exposed to.
Do you have any brands that you recommend for beds?
None that I have spent a lot of time exploring. I use organic pedic, which is just one of the organic. I think it's a latex, kind of like. Well, I won't mention another brand because I don't want them to be unhappy with my comments. But organic pedic is the one that I personally use.
Okay, so organic pedic is the one that you say good things about, and you're not going to mention the bad brand, which now I'm just even more curious.
Well, there's a lot of these memory foam mattress products on the market that are made out of toxic chemicals that you
Yeah,
don't want to sleep on and be exposed to every day.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. So we covered the EMF. Now, before we go on, the Faraday cage that you sleep in, the silver lined cloth,
Yeah.
is there any are there any brands that you'd recommend around that?
So the company that I got mine through that was recommended by Dr. Klinghardt years ago is no longer in business, but the company that he often talks about in lectures is a lady named Lynn, who's up in the Seattle area. She gets the cloth and then custom cuts them to fit the bed size, but also, different options for how you want the fabric to open to, where you get in and out of the bed and those types of things. So she's at littletreegroup.com, littletreegroup.com. And then they also have similar things at lessemf.com and some of the other EMF reducing product companies that are available. But littletreegroup.com is the one that Dr. Klinghardt recommends these days.
Cool. Excellent. All right. We covered that topic. What's next on your list?
Well, KPU, or CryptoPyroLuria, this is a topic that Dr. Klinghardt and I wrote an article on about 10 years ago. And we finally just came back around last year to updating it. It had been 9 years, and there were some newer things that he had learned from his, years of clinical experience looking at this more. So we did an article last year for the Townsend Letter that goes into a lot more detail than what I'll cover here. But CryptoPyroLuria, or KPU, it is a condition that Dr. Klinghardt feels that probably 80% or more of people with chronic Lyme disease and similar conditions are dealing with. It's also very common in the autism population. It can be something that we inherit. It can be something that's induced in us by different types of traumas, by chronic infections. It can be something that's epigenetically turned on by influences like intrauterine or birth or childhood or transgenerational traumas. It can be triggered by maybe a car accident, a significant emotional trauma, a divorce, a death, a physical or sexual abuse type situation. Chronic infections like Lyme disease can itself be a trigger for the condition. And some of the more common symptoms would be things like white spots on the fingernails, which is a clue for zinc deficiency, not recalling your dreams, and then depression is another very commonly associated symptom of KPU. So cryptopyroLuria is essentially a significant loss or peeing out of zinc, B6, biotin, manganese, and arachidonic acid, which is omega-6, and some other nutrients like lithium and things of that nature as well. So Dr. Klinghardt, again, he's found a very high correlation between people dealing with Lyme disease and those people with cryptopyroLuria. At least 4 out of 5, or 80%, is what he's estimated. It can also lead to higher levels of heavy metal toxicity. So the KPU piece, particularly the zinc deficiency, can lead to us accumulating or retaining heavy metals in the system. So addressing KPU can also help from that perspective, from starting to detoxify, again, slowly and cautiously, because if you come in with huge amounts of zinc, you can really start releasing a lot of metals and things in the body and creating an inflammatory situation. I know this from firsthand experience when I started this protocol about 10 years ago and felt quite unwell for several months. So it's not a race. This is something people can do and introduce slowly and methodically over a period of time. More recently, there's been some talk that addressing the KPU issue by supplementing zinc, B6, biotin, omega-6, that can also help with stabilizing some of the mast cell issues and help us to be less responsive to changes in our levels of histamine. So that's something that Dr. Klinghardt's been exploring. And people can either individually supplement zinc, B6, and a lot of the other cofactors, or there are products that are available. I, at this point, use one from BioPure called Core-S, like SAM. Core-S has a lot of these KPU supporting nutrients in it. And again, some people do better by starting with individual things, especially if they're highly reactive and maybe don't tolerate many ingredients in some of the products. But ultimately, if you can tolerate it, or as you start introducing some of the other things, BioPure Core or Core-S are two of the products that kind of make this a little bit easier. It is something that I continue to incorporate into my routine from a supplement perspective. It is something that may go away, but probably not. It's probably something that we do need to support long term. And so if taking a little bit of zinc and B6 and some of these other cofactors in something like Core or Core-S is going to support my immune system and support my body long term, I think it's very reasonable to supplement those things long term. So the article itself goes into lots of detail. If people are interested in that, they can find it on the Townsend Letter website or on my website, either one. And that goes into more specifics.
Excellent. Wonderful. You earlier on had mentioned
Yeah,
SIFO,
SIBO and SIFO.
SIFO, Candida parasites. What do you recommend for those SIFO?
Yeah, so it's SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIFO, which is small intestine fungal overgrowth. Just essentially acknowledging the fact that what people have called SIBO for many years, that can be this dysbiosis of the small intestine, that it's not always bacterial, that there can be a fungal component to it as well. And so more recently, I've heard people talking about both SIBO and SIFO, but very similar, just different organisms that are potentially involved.
Right, because the fungus acts a bit differently than the bacteria. So if someone were to go the more traditional route and take antibiotics for the SIBO, it's not going to do anything for the SIFO, the fungal overgrowth. So we've got to look at this more holistically, and then there's usually herbs that we can take that would help for both the bacteria and for the fungus. Well, what would you recommend for someone with Lyme, or someone with very complicated symptoms that believes they may have, candida or this bacterial fungal overgrowth in the small intestines or parasites?
So I think there are breath tests that you can do for SIBO that look at hydrogen and methane. There is a test that I do like, just in general, looking at a lot of these different overgrowths in the gut from a company. The test is called the GI MAP, MAP, microbial assay, that will help to identify some of these dysbioses. Megaspore Biotic actually has been one of the things that I've been excited about in helping in this realm. And then products like Biobotanical Research makes biocidin. I think that's a great tool. There are some combination products that practitioners will use, like Dysbiocide or FC Cidal. Companies like Beyond Balance have products like IMNGI that can be helpful with some of these scenarios. So I often will look at what are some of the herbal type tools that can be incorporated, and then potentially also along with a beneficial flora tool like the Megaspore Biotic. So I think, unfortunately, SIBO and SIFO seem to be fairly common issues that people are experiencing. The parasite piece can also play a role in these GI dysbioses. One of the challenges with parasites is that people often still think of them as third world country problems, that we certainly don't have them here in America, that somehow their passports are checked at the borders and we don't let them in, but that's certainly not true. Testing for parasites I would say it's notoriously very, very poor. So I think you want to do several different things. I think different systems of energetic testing, whether that's autonomic response testing like Dr. Klinghardt created, if that's something like the Zyto or the Quest 4, the Asira. Dr. Simon Yu uses a system called acupuncture meridian assessment that I think is very, very helpful as well. Dr. Raphael D'Angelo, he has a lab called Para Wellness Research, where they look at both stool and urine samples for the presence of parasites. And he does have a very high percentage of samples where he does find some type of parasite. So I think that's a useful tool. And then Diagnostics, which is a lab that is up near where you are in Washington State, I believe. They have a GI health panel, and then the GI map or microbial assay plus. That's also a very helpful tool. So trying to, especially in the world of parasites, sometimes you need to find a practitioner that really does focus on that. So I mentioned Dr. Simon Yu. He is in St. Louis. He's a medical doctor. He's very, very skilled at identifying and helping to treat parasites. He's got a great book that's actually been available now for several years. It's called Accidental Cure. But I do think it gives people a good overview on parasites, as well as some dental issues that he's really, really skilled in helping to identify. So we deworm our animals regularly, but we never really think that we need to deworm ourselves. And so when you look at Dr. Klinghardt and Dr. Yu, I think they put the parasite issue as a priority, that many chronically ill people are dealing with some parasitic overgrowth or parasitic burden. And when that issue is present, it's something to explore early in treatment rather than later. So before you start getting into Lyme and co-infections and all of that, generally speaking, especially with larger parasites, you generally want to address those very early in a program. So I would say the mold piece comes very early, the detox piece comes very early, and the parasite piece comes very early. So Dr. Klinghardt has also, in the last several years, been talking about parasites potentially serving a role within the body, in that they help to concentrate heavy metals in us, so that those metals are not somewhere else in the body where they might actually do more damage. So the idea that we need to continue focusing on detoxification over time and shifting the terrain in a positive direction, so that the body doesn't potentially need some of these parasites to actually protect us from other toxins. So it's a lot to think about. I think many people are surprised when they start doing, some people even will empirically, based on symptoms, talk to their doctor, incorporate some anti-parasitic tools and herbs and things like that. And they can oftentimes see visible parasites exiting the body. And so we can touch on some of those treatment options if you like as well. But I do think the parasite piece is more common than we think about, and something that we, if we're chronically ill, should really explore.
I definitely want to get into what you think a great holistic approach would be to removing parasites. I love that you brought up Dr. Klinghardt's observation that parasites will become these little sponges in the body to soak up our heavy metals. And when we do a parasite detox too quickly, we kill off too many too fast. And we don't have any sort of supportive therapies in place, like these carbon supplements that help to mop up the waste from dead and dying parasites, that we can actually feel much worse. We feel like much worse. I heard from a naturopath once that if you feel worse from doing a detox, you're not doing it correctly. We do not need to have like that. What is that saying? No pain, no gain. That in fact, if you do a detox really correctly, that means you did a lot of preparation and prepared the body for it. That when you go through the detox, you actually begin to feel better, and you really shouldn't feel worse, or really shouldn't feel much worse. If you do feel much worse, then you've overburned your body.
I would agree with you 100%. Maybe I would use the term Herxheimer reaction rather than detox, only from a perspective of, I think what some practitioners think is helpful is to really be aggressive in terms of antimicrobials, and to say, if you feel worse, that's a good sign that we're killing something. I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think that it's entirely avoidable. I think there will be some times when we start something new and we do have a period where we feel a little bit worse, but it shouldn't be significant. And if you are taking something, generally speaking, it's the antimicrobials that lead to these types of reactions. But if you're taking some killing agent and you feel significantly worse, then either that was too much for you, maybe too strong at the point in the recovery that you are, or I think as much or maybe more commonly, to me, it's an indication that you're not supporting detoxification and drainage enough. So your bucket is already reaching that kind of overflow point, and you add the antimicrobials that create more toxins in the body and microbes that now need to exit the body and are being killed off, and you start to kind of overflow. So by detoxing and draining, you then can reduce what's in the bucket. And I think that concept is really critical in everything that we've talked about. So when somebody has those types of reactions, the first question to me is always, what are you doing for detoxification and drainage? If that's really adequate and they're doing a lot, which is rare, by the way, most of the time people aren't familiar with drainage at all, and maybe aren't on binders at all, or very limited amounts, or different products that they should consider incorporating. And then if they are on adequate detox and drainage and still doing worse by implementing some antimicrobials, then to your point, I think sometimes that could be that it's just too much for them. And then we have to kind of loop back in the whole conversation that we were talking about earlier, which is also covered beautifully in Dr. Nathan's book, about, those people that just are more sensitive, either because they have mast cell activation issues or nervous system issues. They're likely to feel some of those reactions with smaller interventions than maybe someone who isn't as sensitive. And so that's got to be part of that whole evaluation as well. Why are they feeling bad? Is it because they're sensitive and have a mast cell issue or a nervous system issue? Or is it because they're not getting enough detoxification and drainage support? Or is it because the interventions are just too aggressive for that person at this time?
So what protocol do you recommend?
Well, if we're still talking about the parasite piece, there are natural options, there's pharmaceutical options. People like Dr. Klinghardt at this point, I think, would generally say that many people need a combination of both. Dr. Yu and Dr. Klinghardt for some years now have tended to incorporate the pharmaceutical options. I think Dr. Klinghardt tends to like to combine both pharmaceutical and natural options when he can do that. So could be something pharmaceutical like biltricide, ivermectin, Alinea, Albenza. Those were things that I did use in my own journey. I did find them helpful, but I do think there's a lot of natural options that can be helpful as well. So given that, just like many other things, the parasites are over time becoming less responsive to some of of these interventions and to some of the pharmaceuticals, that combination often can be quite ideal. And so if we look at some of the natural options, fortunately, there's a lot of companies that are starting to focus on and come up with tools in this arena. So if we look at things like BioPure, for example, they have the Nexus suppository that has been very helpful for a number of people that I've interacted with. Mimosa pudica, which is an herb, that's available now through several different companies, BioPure being one of them. Supreme Nutrition being another. Love their products at Supreme Nutrition. Microbe Formulas is another one that's just really been available maybe the last year or so commercially. They have a couple of different products. The organic Mimosa pudica and Formula One are the products that they have in the realm of parasites. I like Dr. David Jernigan from the Hansa Center. They have a product called Paragen, which is an herbal formula that is very, very helpful for many people. Beyond Balance has MCPZ and Paracetamol and Paralevier. Byron White has AP. So there's a number of products that are available in the natural realm as well. I know Dr. D'Angelo, I mentioned him earlier, who does the para wellness research testing. He incorporates herbs with essential oils in a protocol that he outlines for each of his patients. And then I think after people have done some initial course of treatment for, a period of a few months, generally, sometimes longer, using then the full moon cycle for some additional number of months, where maybe 5 to 7 days around or before and after a full moon, you're kind of pulsing the parasite treatments. Sometimes parasites can be more active around the full moon, and they can, the larger parasites particularly that can be egg layers, sometimes you need to go through several cycles in order to really eradicate them as much as possible. And then I tend to also like incorporating homeopathic options or frequency-based options. So things like companies like Energetics or Picana, Viatrex, they have different homeopathic tools that can also be very helpful for parasite-related issues. So my personal preference tends to generally be to incorporate an herbal product with a homeopathic. And then in some cases, on the pharmaceutical side, probably my observation has been that ivermectin and Alinea are tools that people oftentimes can find very helpful as well. Alinea, interestingly, can be helpful for parasites, but it also can be helpful for Borrelia, which is the main bacteria in Lyme, and it can also be helpful for Babesia. So lots of reasons potentially that Alinea can be supportive in someone dealing with parasites and Lyme disease.
You gave us a lot of different options. I know I've done Dr. J. Davidson's one. You'd mentioned the organic Mimosa pudica and Formula One, along
Right.
with his carbon supplements, which I actually really noticed a difference. I skipped them. I was on the parasite cleanse, and I skipped the carbon supplements for one day because I just got busy, forgot to take them. And the next day I woke up full on flu. I felt like I was dying. I was lying there with every flu symptom imaginable.
Wow.
And a few hours later, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I caught the flu." And a few hours later, I realized, wait a second, I didn't take my carbon supplements. And so I started taking them. I started like chowing down on the chlorella, jumped into a hot Epsom salt magnesium bath, and took more of the supportive carbon supplements. And I think he has 3 different ones now. At the time, there was only 2 different kinds of carbon filaments. And
Right.
within 90 minutes, all my symptoms were gone. I kind of felt like I'd been through something, like I got hit by a truck.
I like those products quite a lot as well. So Metchem, which used to be under a different name, but it's now called Metchem, which is the heavy metals and chemicals. I think that's probably my favorite, but then it depends on if someone's dealing with metals, Metchem might be more appropriate, where if they're dealing with mold, the Biotox might be more appropriate. If they're dealing with viruses and retroviral type issues, like we talked about earlier, they have one called Bioactive Carbon Foundation. And my understanding is that they have a couple of new products just about to come out in the realm of mineral support, and also another one of the carbons for viruses and retroviruses, I believe.
Yeah, so I was really impressed that when I didn't stick to his program the way it was designed, that really felt a difference. I felt sick because there I was. My body was killing the supplements were killing the parasites, and my body was being exposed to the toxins and released from dead and dying parasites. And I felt it, whereas I'd been going screaming through that cleanse for about I was 2 or 3 weeks in, not feeling anything, not really thinking it was working. Boy, was I wrong. It was definitely working. So I got right back on the routine, and boom, I didn't have any of those symptoms anymore. But I really paid attention to stick with exactly the protocol he recommends and the timing of taking the supplements that he recommends and not deviating from it, which I thought was really interesting. Now, you gave us so many choices, and I love that there's choices out there, but people are probably thinking like, well, which one's right for me? Um, I really enjoy the energetic testing that Dr. Klinghardt does, because as part of the energetic testing, they can help dial in what your body is most receptive towards. Would you say when it comes to figuring out what kind of parasite detox someone should go on, that they should seek out a certain type of practitioner in order to help them establish which one would be best for them?
My whole journey was certainly influenced very significantly by energetic testing, by Dr. Klinghardt's work. I've worked with practitioners now for years that use his autonomic response testing. I also have learned it and was certified in it many years ago, and think that it is a phenomenal tool. So I think the answer is yes. When someone has access to a practitioner that knows about parasites, knows about Lyme, whether they're using autonomic response testing or another system. That's not the only system. I mean, it is my personal favorite, but that doesn't mean that other practitioners using other types of energetic tools can't also make those tools sing. So I think that using something like energetic testing, it's a tool, but you still have to know what questions to ask, and the practitioner has to still have knowledge about that domain. So you could go to the best muscle tester in the world, but if you were dealing with Lyme disease and they didn't know anything about Lyme disease, they wouldn't know how to explore that issue for your specific system. So you want to look at, yes, what technique are they using, but also do they just have general knowledge of that specific domain? And if someone is available that can do that, I think that's a fantastic way to do it. If not, sometimes people will need to work with their practitioner and their practitioner's favorite products and empirically try some things and see how they respond to them. But I think the energetic testing is, it's a great tool. It's just you have to match the technique with a practitioner whose domain of knowledge matches the types of things that you're personally dealing with in your own health condition.
Right, right. I think I asked this of you before. Do you take on clients personally?
I do some phone coaching as far as the energetic testing work. I do that on referral only from a couple of local doctors, and so if people are interested in that, they can reach out. But for the most part, with the ART work, I'm pretty booked at this point. But if they're interested and open to working with specific doctors that I also collaborate with, that's potentially an option as well. And then if
Got
they
it.
just want to connect one-on-one for some coaching work, I do that also.
Well, I highly recommend anyone with Lyme, or if they suspect they have Lyme, they should definitely reach out to you for some coaching, because you have been in this field for so long that you have colleagues spread out all around the world, and you could definitely help someone find the right person for them to work with, if they needed to work with someone in person, especially for the energetic testing. So I know that you're just such a resource that is so powerful to have in our tool belt to be able to conquer this
Thank you.
this Lyme issue. We talked a little bit about last time about co-infections.
Yes,
Um, do you want to just touch on that subject,
sure.
so that some people with Lyme who've begun to sort of look into this realize that it's not just get rid of the Lyme and it's gone, that there's all these other co-infections. And can you just explain sort of this the dynamic of what it looks like to approach this holistically?
You bet. So I think in the realm of Lyme and co-infections, Lyme, what we refer to as Lyme, is more correctly Borrelia burgdorferi. Some people, when they say Lyme, they're actually talking about Borrelia and co-infections. And so the more common co-infections when someone's dealing with Borrelia or Lyme are Bartonella and Babesia. There can be other rickettsias. Some people also are dealing with mycoplasmas, chlamydias, things of that nature that sometimes are not necessarily co-infections per se. They may not be acquired at the same time that you acquired the Borrelia, the Bartonella, and the Babesia from a particular insect or other vector. They may be things that have been in your system or that you got exposed to in another way that become more opportunistic because your immune system is either suppressed or more likely dysregulated or confused. But I would say if we look at the primary Borrelia, Bartonella, and Babesia, from my perspective, create more symptoms for most people than Borrelia. I also think they're probably more challenging to treat. And people really should look with their doctors at, if you don't have someone that does energetic testing or these have not come up in other tests, the testing that you can do in the realm of Lyme and co-infections is not perfect. It's definitely getting better. There are some labs now, DNA Connections, Armin labs that do find some of these co-infections. The IGeneX panels have recently been enhanced quite a lot. And so there are some tools in that realm. But if you don't show these co-infections coming up, unfortunately, with some of the labs, they still are only able to test a subset of the known strains of these organisms that can cause symptoms. So you may have to look at the list of symptoms for some of these things, like Bartonella. Do you wake up in the morning with sore soles of the feet that tend to improve as the day goes on? Do you have muscle twitching or fasciculations? Do you have what looks like stretch marks, or I think now we're calling them Bartonella tracks? Looks like stretch marks, but they're not from stretch marks. They're not from someone who's gained and lost a lot of weight, and they actually don't go in the same skin planes as someone who would actually have stretch marks. Anxiety, OCD, rages, those can all be Bartonella associated. Babesia, night sweats, day sweats, air hunger, persistent coughing, cherry angiomas sometimes, so that these can both have different skin presentations. So I think if someone is dealing with Lyme, chances are almost certainly, though there probably are some exceptions, but chances are that if they have Borrelia, they probably have either Bartonella and or Babesia and or some of these other common co-infections or opportunistic infections that need to be explored as well. Another less common but still not uncommon co-infection is what's known as Ehrlichia or Anaplasma. So those can also be other bacteria that people are dealing with when they're dealing with Lyme disease. And some practitioners may look at the symptoms that someone's dealing with, and if they seem to match a particular pattern for a given co-infection, and maybe they have not had energetic testing available, maybe they've not shown up in any of the labs, they may then do what's called a provocation test, where a specific herbal formula generally that is known to be more targeted to a given microbe, like possibly A. Bart from Byron White formulas for Bartonella, or Bar1 from Beyond Balance, or ABAB or BAB 1, 2, or 3 from Byron White formulas and Beyond Balance. Those might then be used to see what type of response does a person have to them. When using them in a provoking fashion, sometimes the amount given would be a little higher than what you would generally use if you were using them specifically for treatment. And what you're trying to see is what kind of response does the person have to those herbs that are generally a little more specific for certain types of co-infections. Do they feel better? And that's useful information. But more commonly, they feel a flare of the symptoms associated to that particular co-infection. So if you have Bartonella and you take, let's say, a BART, and you notice that your anxiety, your rage, your OCD gets worse, or, babesia and your night sweats get worse, or whatever symptom associated to that co-infection, that gives the practitioner a clue that maybe this particular co-infection is an issue that we should continue to explore from a treatment perspective. And so then you can decide what path do you want to go down. There's lots of different approaches. Yes, I think antimicrobials are, generally speaking, necessary if someone has Lyme and co-infections. There are some what I would consider adjunct therapies, like low-dose immunotherapy, where you're modulating the immune system's response or creating what I referred to earlier as tolerance or integration within the microbiome, so that the immune system isn't overreacting every time it sees Bartonella or Babesia, for example, creating more inflammation, creating more symptoms. So lots of different ways that these microbes could be approached. It could be with antibiotics. It could be with low dose immunotherapy or LDI. It could be with homeopathy. And fortunately, there's a lot of companies that have emerged over the past 13 years since my diagnosis with Lyme disease. When I was first diagnosed, the direction that I was given was the only real tool we have is antibiotics, and you will probably be on them for 2 to 5 years, and you might be on them for the rest of your life. And so, times have fortunately changed a lot from back then. We have lots of tools, many companies that really focus in this realm of vector-borne conditions and how to support people dealing with Lyme and related conditions. So some of the ones that I really like, Beyond Balance, which I've mentioned a few times in today's conversation, BioPure, which takes a lot of guidance from Dr. Klinghardt, has some great products, Byron White formulas. Mapa Herbals is a smaller company that a lot of people haven't heard of, but Mapa Herbals has products for Lyme or Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, and so on that have very consistently been helpful for people that I've interacted with. Nutramedics, which is Dr. Lee Cowden's Cemento, Banderol, Kumanda, a whole program that they've put together called the Cowden Support Program, which is actually one of the few Nutramedics and Vital Plan, which I think is also a fantastic option for people. Vital Plan was put together by Dr. Bill Rawls based on his own experience dealing with Lyme disease and using herbs, and largely influenced by Stephen Buhner's work. And so Nutramedics and Vital Plan both have programs that I think are options for people that cannot access, either because they don't live near somebody or financially they just can't afford to go to a Lyme literate medical doctor. They both have programs that I think are kind of put together very nicely with information and with some support and things like that, where people can potentially start exploring treatment without necessarily having that strong of a medical team behind them. Research Nutritionals is another company that has some great products in Lyme and this whole realm of detoxification. Supreme Nutrition, which is influenced by the work of Dr. Michael Leibowitz and his son Noah Leibowitz. They have a number of fantastic antimicrobials, detox support tools. Probably the product that's most popular from them is called Takasumi Supreme, which is a detoxification carbonized bamboo product that I've used for at least a decade and just find to be very, very helpful for people. So I think you have to kind of look at the Borrelia, the Bartonella, the Babesia, and then explore a lot of these other issues. Many people have chronic viruses like Epstein-Barr virus, HHV6, cytomegalovirus, a number of viruses that can play a role, fungal overgrowths like Candida or Candida, different yeasts, the possibility that some of these things like Aspergillus and Penicillium and so on that we get exposed to from water damaged buildings, the possibility that those can colonize the sinuses and the gastrointestinal tract, and then some of these other either co-infections or opportunistic infections like Rickettsia, Ehrlichia, anaplasma, mycoplasma, chlamydia, pneumonia. There can be a lot of them, but that's what I would kind of say at this point, is really looking at what are the co-infections that may be playing a role, and then working closely with a practitioner that knows how to either empirically start treating them using either antibiotics, herbs, homeopathy, LDI, or other tools that are available to us.
What I love is that you have outlined that there are so many tools that work, because I feel that people with Lyme who've seen, let's say, medical doctors, for example, and haven't explored yet the holistic realm, may feel that they're very limited. Like you said back in the day, and I'm sure there's still some practitioners that still do this. Oh, you got to be on antibiotics for a few years. And that's just not the case. It's just so ineffective and so harmful. It's harmful to the body. Every time we get on antibiotics, yes, I understand that there's certain times when, we're very happy and thankful that they exist, but we see now that in the long term, it causes such worse damage to the body. And we can, now that we know that there are tools that are holistic tools that are very effective, you have given hope. You've given hope to many people today, hearing about all the tools that are now at their disposal, that now that they can, with all these tools, they can go to their practitioner. Maybe they should share this episode with their practitioner to listen to, and work with them, or find one that's knowledgeable in this, or talk with you and gain some coaching with you to create their plan of action. But I hope that everyone here is filled with hope that there are ways to heal the body in the face of these weird infections and co-infections and parasites, and basically whatever the body's being bombarded with. And like you said, with CryptoPyroLuria, the body's bleeding out certain nutrients that are critical, that throw the body out of balance. There's hope that we can restore the body back into balance with natural medicine. So I'm very excited that you have illustrated that today.
I definitely agree. I think that the more broadly we can cast the net, and the broader the number of things we look at, the more likely it is that people can make progress with a number of the things that we've talked about. I think if people focus just on taking antibiotics for Lyme, and there are people who have tried lots of natural things that their ticket to recovering was to incorporate antibiotics. So it's not where I would personally go first if I were starting over, but I'm also respectful of those as a tool in the toolbox for the right person at the right time in the right situation. But I do think that if we think of these types of conditions as being a bucket that has overflown, the more drains we have, whether that's detoxification, whether that's the EMF reduction, whether that's fixing our environment from mold, the more we can drain the bucket, the more likely we are to no longer experience those symptoms, which really are our bucket has overflown. What our body can tolerate has now overflown, and that's what we experience as symptoms. So if we just focused on taking antibiotics for Lyme disease, and we're still living in a moldy house, and we have dental issues, and we haven't detoxified, you can probably take antibiotics for years and maybe not make any significant progress. But as you start incorporating all of these different components, I love Dr. Richard Horowitz. He calls it the 16 nails in the foot in his MSIDS model, that you can pull out 3 of the nails, but if you still have 13 nails in your foot is still going to hurt. So I think that's really my message. And I think the broader we cast the net, the more of these things we look at, the less aggressive we have to be with any one of them, because we're just taking a more holistic approach. And that's why personally, I think naturopathic doctors are a phenomenal fit for a condition like Lyme disease, because they're used to looking at all of the different factors and not just saying, okay, you have Lyme disease, it's come back on a test, let's let's put you on antibiotics for years, or you have Epstein-Barr virus, which most of the population has, and so now we need to really focus on Epstein-Barr virus. No, you need to look at 10 or 15 or 20 different things potentially, but the more of them that you can incorporate into your treatment approach, my experience has been the more optimal the outcome.
Now, you keep mentioning dental contributors, and I believe that that is the last point, the last bullet point that we were going to cover today. So we've saved the best for last. Let's talk about dental contributors. Definitely a very common topic to know about mercury amalgams, but not everyone knows. Still not everyone knows how dangerous they are. But then we also have infections in our that we could have sort of festering, slowly growing in our jaw and
Yes.
gums and teeth. And so yes, let's talk about the dental contributors to our health.
So I think the dental contributors, they definitely can be a significant factor. Again, I think if we look more holistically, then maybe we don't need to be as aggressive in any one area. But I also think the dental issues can be part of setting the stage for why we later maybe develop a condition from mold illness or from Lyme disease. So in my personal case, I had my wisdom teeth taken out in high school. I developed a dry socket. It was packed with antibiotics for some period of time, and you were told, great, everything is fine. Well, later, years later, maybe 10 years later, I developed Lyme disease. I developed mold illness. And it wasn't until 2000 and I want to say 13 that working with Dr. Simon Yu, who I mentioned earlier, that worked with parasites and dental explorations, I actually was at his conference and I thought, I'm going to St. Louis. I'm going to his conference. I was excited to learn some new things. And I called his office and said, hey, can I get an appointment around the time of that conference and see what he comes up with? And so he said, you have a dental cavitation. And so dental cavitations are different from cavities. Dental cavitations usually are infections in the jawbone in areas where a tooth was previously extracted, that it didn't heal correctly, the bone gets mushy, and you do have ongoing microbial growth and release of toxins that are very toxic to the body in those areas. So he had sent me to a surgeon to explore. The surgeon at the time said, I don't really see anything significant. I probably wouldn't recommend that you necessarily do anything, but I've worked with Dr. Yu long enough to know that when he finds an issue, he's right. So the surgeon said, you can go to lunch, think about it, and if you want me to cut you open and do this procedure, I'll do it. And so once he got in there, he said, oh my gosh, there's black stuff, there's orange fluid leaking out. He's like, that this is crazy. He definitely was right again. So, there's lots of these. Yes, mercury amalgams play a role. No, if someone's sick with Lyme disease, they probably aren't good to have in your body. At the same time, incorrectly removing them can lead people to a more significant health problem. So you have to look at, do you have the right person? Do they know what they're doing? Is it the right time? Are you systemically supporting detoxification and drainage and all of those other things? I know a number of people whose chronic Lyme disease started after incorrect removal of mercury amalgams that exposed them to more toxicity, and then things kind of snowballed from there. So the amalgam certainly can contribute to our body burden of metals, and I do think in many cases we should consider removing them. But again, I'm not suggesting people jump out and just go start taking them out, because that there can be the wrong time to do that. Root canals. I was fortunate not to have any root canals. I think a lot of people, if they don't have a significant health challenge, their body might be able to manage to some extent the presence of a root canal. Is it good for anyone? Probably not. If you have a chronic health challenge like Lyme disease or other long-term condition, does it make sense? And do some people notice improvements when they have their root canals removed? that's a discussion that people should explore with their doctor and their biological dentist. But sometimes people do better after having those removed. It's the only Practitioners often explain this, saying it's the only place in medicine where we would leave a dead body part in the body, right? The tooth is dead, it's producing toxins, it's infected with many different types of organisms, and yet somehow it's okay that we leave the root canal and the dead tooth in the body. Well, again, if you're healthy, maybe your body can compensate, but if you're not, it may not be able to. And then the cavitations that I just kind of shared my story, I think it's very possible that for me, that might have been another factor setting the stage for later getting a tick exposure and then having everything kind of fall apart from there. It might have just been that kind of chronic infection had been brewing for many years. The tonsils, they also can play a big role. So a little bit different from the dental piece, but it's not uncommon for people to have tonsil issues, a history of tonsil issues, issues related to strep. In some cases, people that have PANDAS, or a pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated to strep. There's also PANS, which is a whole nother topic, which is a similar condition, not triggered by strep, but the tonsils. I believe Dr. Klinghardt calls them the toilet of the brain. So they certainly can play a role when it comes to various infections and stressors on the body as well. I think it is important that people dealing with chronic Lyme disease and similar conditions do have some type of really good oral health program in place, and whether that's using things like oral defense from Supreme Nutrition, dental Sidon, or dental Sidon LS, I believe, from biobotanical research, doing oil pulling, all of those things can help. And when we reduce our burden of microbes in the oral cavity, we are also reducing stress on the rest of the body. So I think that's very important. I do think there are people that may need a surgical intervention if they have cavitations. And I'm somewhat conservative about this arena because I have seen people who were very aggressive in approaching, their dental resolution and maybe developed complications as a result of that. So you really have to, find a dentist who's a really good biological dentist, who's done a lot of this work, who really knows what they're doing and can kind of meet you where your body is able to go. In my case, I think doing the dental cavitation work was helpful. And I do think that exploring, dental contributors can be very helpful in moving someone forward if they're, still struggling with a lot of the other things that they're already doing.
It's fascinating you brought up pandas and pans. A dear friend of mine's daughter has pandas, and they're really struggling. Many of the doctors don't believe it. They've come up against so many brick walls in the medical establishment, and they finally found a naturopath that specifically only deals with pans and pandas for
Right.
children. And so I'm actually going to have her on the show soon. And I'm really excited that now finally it's starting to, more and more practitioners are becoming aware of this, because I've watched this beautiful young girl. I've known her since I think she was 5 or 6. And now she's an early teenager, and I've watched her, and she's so intelligent and she's so wonderful. And she started to have these weird symptoms, like walking into walls, and not being able to walk through a door, like but just hitting the wall, and having seizures, and just having the brain fog, and really the memory, not having the memory like she used to, not being able to be chatty and talk like she used to. And just, it was so heartbreaking to see her go down that road. And now that her mom sort of figured out what it was, and has been helping her as best as possible, we're starting to see sort of the lights come back on. But
Right.
it is that slow and arduous sometimes process. But thank God that there's that holistic approach to supporting the body, and trying to, like you said, decrease all of the stressors on the body. And it's so interesting that something we really take for granted, our oral health, could be a major contributor to exacerbating our illness.
Absolutely. I think that pandas and now pans is where Lyme disease might have been 10 or 15 years ago in terms of acceptance and people at least having an awareness of it. I think it will definitely move in that same direction, that people will become much more aware and knowledgeable and have the right tools. Pandas, pans, Morgellons, those are all conditions where people are still very much questioned and invalidated for their condition, because primarily whoever they're interacting with is not aware and not informed and doesn't have the tools to offer them a solution. But I do, I've interacted with a number of kids that had pandas and pans. I've had Amy Joy Smith on the podcast previously as well. It is a very real condition, and it will continue to gain acceptance. It's just some of these things take time, and I don't really see pandas and pans and autism and chronic Lyme disease and Alzheimer's and MS. I mean, I really, over time, I see more similarities than I do differences, and a lot of them being the chronic infections, the chronic toxicity, and the environment in which we live, having so many things that are just not supportive of our health. So I think eventually we'll see that they really are a lot of the same underlying factors, and the presentation tends to depend a lot on the age in which we encounter these things and whether or not we've already neurologically developed or not, in terms of whether we develop something like pandas or autism, or as an adult, chronic Lyme disease, or later, some of the other neurological diseases. And we're seeing that now with Dr. Dale Bredesen talking about Lyme disease and mold being factors involved in many cases of Alzheimer's disease.
Oh, fascinating. That's a really good point that you brought up. One of the naturopaths that has trained me and I've worked with for the last 7 years said that MS, Parkinson's, and Lou Gehrig's disease are all the same disease. And he was a pathologist before he became a naturopathic physician. And he says it's this exact same disease expressing in a different part of the nervous system, but the treatment for him, because again, he's a naturopath, so it's going to be a totally different treatment than people are expecting, but the treatment is the same. And the treatment, because it's the same stressor just showing up a little bit differently in the body. And maybe that's because, like you said, the age in which they're exposed to the stressors, or maybe a bit of that has to do with genetics, where they're strong in their genetics, where they're weak in their genetics. Either way, he sees it as the exact same problem. And so he looks at the body, much like you just described, the same group of stressors, meaning not enough nutrients, too much toxins, maybe some emotional traumas and issues, but this whole big group, right? This whole big group of stressors on the body. If we had it in utero, it can appear as autism. If we had it, when we were 7 or 9, maybe it becomes pandas. If we have it in our 40s or 50s, it becomes Lyme disease or MS. But that these stressors are many things that accumulate over time until the body just cannot cope with it anymore. And that's why it's so important to look at, like you've mentioned in this interview and then in our last one, the list of things that has helped you and so many of the people you've worked with and your colleagues have worked with to no longer have Lyme disease express any symptoms in your life, to no longer have that be an issue, to have regained all of your health, because you had to do things like look at, like you said, the 16 nails. You had to look at your oral health, look at any kind of co-infections, parasites, look at take over your digestive health. Make sure your body's detoxifying safely. Protect yourself from EMF. Protect yourself from any exposures in the future to chemicals. Make sure the diet you're eating is supportive of your immune system, of your body at the time, specifically to you, because like you said, we might have allergies specific to us, or we have got to just turn our diet into something that's going to be healing for us as individuals at that time, because food is medicine. and taking this all in, and of course also the emotional work and the healing work, taking it all in, no matter who we are in life, where we are in life, if we took all of these steps that we would all gain better health. And I love that you, through all of your years, unfortunately you had to suffer. I'm so sorry for you to have gone through the years and years and years of suffering, and I'm so honored that you went through that and learned how to reverse it, and now you've dedicated your life to hopefully ending the suffering of others. So you've really made your suffering in the past into something that is going to better thousands and thousands of people. So thank you so much for dedicating your life to helping others hopefully end their suffering, just like you have.
Thank you. I definitely agree that that is one of my goals. I don't think I would trade my experience, because it definitely has brought me to my, my purpose and passion, and the thing that excites me about waking up every day to be able to help someone else that's going through a similar journey. So it certainly was challenging, but I think, to your earlier comment, there are so many reasons now to be hopeful. I think people find doctors and knowledgeable practitioners now much sooner than they might have a decade ago. And so I think if we cast a broad net, I talked a little about the article from the Townsend letter this summer, which was casting a broad net to maximize Lyme disease recovery. But to this whole conversation, that last Lyme disease recovery could be fill in the blank with many other conditions. And the more that we look at detoxification and diet and emotional backdrop and, the microbial piece and so on, I do think it applies to many, many conditions. And it's actually really fun for me to be a part of seeing people make progress in their own journey.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show again and completing this topic. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you and to learn from you. And I'm really excited for listeners to also check out your podcast, betterhealthguy.com. Scott, is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up today's interview?
No, I think we've covered it. I maybe would mention Limelight Foundation, which is an organization that I am on the board of, and we provide treatment grants to children and young adults 25 and under that are dealing with Lyme disease. So if anyone listening is in need of a grant potentially, or is drawn to support an organization doing that type of work, they can find more information at limelightfoundation.org. And I just want to thank you for inviting me, for making this possible. And you clearly know your stuff. So I'm giving you some kudos for the great work that you're doing. And I know that you are helping people in a tremendous way as well. So thank you so much, Ashley.
Are you looking to optimize your health? Are you looking to get the best supplements at the lowest price? For high quality supplements and to talk to someone about what supplements are best for you, go to takeyoursupplements.com. And one of our fantastic true health coaches will help you pick out the right supplements for you that are the highest quality and the best price. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Be sure to ask about free shipping and our awesome referral program.